Babylon was once one of the most magnificent cities on earth, but like all great powers, it rose slowly and fell quietly. Tonight, let that sentence settle over you like dust settling over an ancient floor. There is no rush. There is nowhere else to be. Close your eyes, if you like. Imagine the air first. It is warm, the kind of warmth that does not press against you but simply surrounds you, the way a room holds heat long after the fire inside it has gone cold. It is the air of the Mesopotamian plain, carried in across the flat, open land between two rivers. The Euphrates moves somewhere nearby, wide and unhurried, its surface catching the last pale light of an evening that ended a very long time ago. The sky above is enormous here. There are no hills to interrupt it, no forests to soften its edges. Just sky, and beneath the sky, the walls. The walls of Babylon. Even from a distance, even before the gates, even before the towers, you would have understood. Something immense lives here. Something that took generations of human hands to build, layer upon layer, brick upon sun-dried brick, each one stamped with the name of a king. The walls rise in the fading light like a coastline of stone and silence. And for a moment, standing in the warm dark of a night that is now more than 2,000 years behind us, it is possible to feel what travelers once felt when they first approached this city from the road, a quieting of the mind, a slowing of the breath, as though the body itself understood it was approaching something that demanded stillness. We are going to spend this evening inside that stillness. Not in the loud version of history, not in the battles or the proclamations or the dates carved into official stone. We are going to move through Babylon the way a river moves through land it has always known. Slowly. With patience. Following the shape of things as they actually were, before the centuries compressed them into paragraphs and footnotes and the hard edges of summary. Babylon is a word that carries a great deal of weight. It has meant, at different times in human history, almost everything a city can mean. It has been a seat of law, a center of astronomy, a place of exile, a name whispered in religious texts with a mixture of awe and dread. For the Hebrew prophets, it was the city of captivity. For the Greek travelers who came later, it was one of the wonders of the known world. For the kings who built and rebuilt it across centuries, it was simply home, the most important place in the universe, the center around which all other things turned. But tonight, we are not going to approach it through any of those lenses. We are going to approach it the way you might approach a sleeping animal, gently, without agenda, with the kind of quiet attention that allows you to see what is actually there rather than what you expected to find. The city sat in what is now southern Iraq, near a town called Hilla, in the broad flat valley that ancient people called the land between two rivers, Mesopotamia, from the Greek words for middle and river. The Tigris and the Euphrates had been shaping this land for thousands of years before Babylon appeared, cutting channels through the silt, flooding in spring, retreating in summer, leaving behind the dark, rich soil that made farming possible in a landscape that might otherwise have been only dry wind and dust. It was the rivers that made civilization here. It was the rivers that made Babylon. The earliest traces of settlement in the region go back deep, past the Babylonians, past even the Akkadians who preceded them, to a time so remote it exists more in archaeology than in memory, in fragments of clay and impression rather than story. But Babylon is Babylon, the city with a name, with walls, with kings who called themselves kings of the world, began to take its distinctive shape sometime around the early second millennium before the Common Era. 4,000 years ago, give or take a few centuries on either side. 4,000 years. It is worth pausing on that number. Not to be dramatic about it, but simply to let it soften the ground beneath everything else we are about to explore. When we speak of Babylon tonight, we are speaking of a city that was already ancient when Rome was still a collection of villages on a muddy hill. A city that had already fallen and been rebuilt and fallen again before the birth of philosophy in Greece, before the construction of the Parthenon, before almost everything that Western civilization tends to think of as old. The world we are entering tonight is genuinely old, old in a way that the mind cannot quite hold steady, but can, if allowed to relax its grip on the present, begin to sense. Let the number go. Let the dates dissolve a little at the edges. What we are left with is this: a city built on a flat plain beside a wide river, surrounded by walls so large that later writers would struggle to describe them without sounding as though they were inventing something. Filled, at its height, with perhaps hundreds of thousands of people, merchants and priests, farmers and scribes, soldiers quartered near the gates, astronomers watching the sky from the tops of step towers, children running on mud brick streets that had been worn smooth by the passing of feet over the passing of years. A city that smelled of river water and baked bread and burning cedar oil. A city where the heat of summer pressed down like a heavy hand and the winter nights turned cold enough to see your breath. A city that held, in its libraries and its temples and its markets, a great deal of what human beings had learned about the world in the few thousand years since they had begun to write things down. That city is where we are going tonight. There is a particular kind of peace that comes from thinking about old places in the dark. Something about the distance, the vast, comfortable distance of time, makes the past feel safe in a way the present sometimes cannot. Nothing that happened in Babylon can reach us now. Whatever was urgent there has long since resolved itself into silence and soil. And yet it was real. The people were real. Their mornings and their evenings were real as yours is right now. So let the night settle around you, and let your breathing slow, and let us begin at the beginning, or as close to the beginning as the light of what survives will allow us to see. The Euphrates is moving in the dark. The walls are rising in the warm air. Somewhere inside the city, a lamp is burning. We are almost there. Before there was a city, there was water. Not the water of fountains or wells or the careful irrigation channels that farmers dug with wooden tools across the flat land, but water as a presence, water as a force that moved through this part of the world the way breath moves through a sleeping body. Rhythmic. Inevitable. The source of everything. The two rivers have names that go back further than writing itself. The Tigris and the Euphrates. Even the sound of them, spoken quietly in the dark, carries something ancient, a cadence that belongs to a world before cities, before kings, before the long human project of organizing the land into something that could be owned and named and passed down. The rivers were here before all of that. They will be here, in some form, long after the last trace of everything we are discussing tonight has dissolved back into the soil from which it came. The Euphrates, in particular, was Babylon's river. It ran to the west of where the city would eventually stand, and then, over centuries, it shifted, the way rivers do, slowly and without asking permission, until it ran directly through the heart of the city, splitting it into two halves the way a long sleep splits a night into the part you remember and the part you do not. The river was not merely a landmark or a boundary. It was the city's reason for existing, its source of water for drinking and for farming, its highway for trade, carrying boats loaded with grain and dates and wool and cedar wood and tin down from the mountains to the north and back again. Its protection on one flank, its identity on a deeper level than any king's decree could provide. To understand Babylon, you have to understand what the land looked like before it. Imagine standing on the Mesopotamian plain in a time before any of this, before the bricks, before the walls, before the ziggurats rising into the hot sky. The land is almost perfectly flat. Flat in a way that becomes, after a while, its own kind of beauty, the way the surface of a calm lake is beautiful, or the way a long, uninterrupted horizon can produce in the body a feeling of expansion, of the chest opening, of breath coming more easily. There are no hills here. No dramatic geography, no cliffs or gorges to catch the eye and orient the traveler. Just the plain, stretching in every direction, and above the plain, the sky, enormous and unmediated, full of stars at night in a density that people who live near cities now have almost entirely forgotten was once the ordinary face of darkness. The soil beneath your feet is dark. Darker than you might expect this far from the obvious richness of a forest or a mountainside. It is silt, carried down from the highlands to the north by thousands of years of flooding, deposited here in the low country where the rivers slow and spread and relinquish what they have been carrying. This is some of the most fertile soil on earth, and the people who first settled here understood that, even if they had no word for fertility in the abstract agricultural sense that we might use today, they understood it the way you understand warmth when you step out of cold air, immediately, in the body, without needing to think about it. Every spring, the rivers flooded. This is the rhythm that governed everything in early Mesopotamia, the pulse beneath all the other pulses, the festivals, the planting seasons, the careful calculations of the priests, the whole elaborate machinery of Babylonian civilization. The floods came when the snow melted in the mountains far to the north, sending water rushing down through the foothills and out onto the plain in sheets and surges that could swallow entire villages if those villages had been placed without wisdom. The floods were dangerous. They were also the source of the soil's darkness, its depth, its extraordinary capacity to produce grain in quantities that could feed not just a family or a village but a city of hundreds of thousands of people who did not themselves farm, who spent their days making laws or recording transactions or watching the stars or baking bread in clay ovens or performing rituals that had been performed, in more or less the same form, for longer than anyone could remember. The flooding made agriculture possible. Agriculture made surplus possible. Surplus made cities possible. Cities made everything else possible. It sounds simple when laid out like that. A clean progression, like steps leading upward toward something inevitable. But the reality was messier, slower, more contingent, full of failed harvests and floods that came too early or too late, of communities that did not survive and settlements that were abandoned and places where the experiment of living together in large numbers simply did not work out. The progression toward Babylon was not inevitable in the way that a seed becoming a tree is inevitable, given enough water and light. It was more like the way a river finds its course, through resistance and redirection, through the slow erosion of obstacles, through the quiet persistence of water moving always in the direction that the land allows. And the land here allowed something remarkable. Between the two rivers, in the alluvial plain that the Greeks would eventually call Mesopotamia, the land in the middle, human beings began doing something they had never quite managed to do before in the same way, in the same density, in the same complexity. They began living together in very large numbers, and organizing that life with increasing sophistication, and writing things down, and building structures that were meant to last beyond a single generation, and developing systems of law and record and religion elaborate enough to bind strangers together into something that functioned as a coherent whole. This did not happen overnight. It did not happen in a single place. The cities of Mesopotamia emerged over a long, slow process. Uruk, Ur, Eridu, Nippur, names that feel ancient even among ancient names, each of them representing a different chapter in the long experiment of urban life. They rose and fell and rose again, absorbed into larger powers or destroyed by floods or warfare, their populations scattering and regathering the way water finds new channels after a dam breaks. Babylon was not the first of these cities. It was, in many ways, an inheritor, a place that arrived relatively late to a tradition of urban civilization that had already been developing for a very long time on the same plain, beside the same rivers, under the same enormous sky. But what Babylon inherited, it transformed. It took the accumulated knowledge of several thousand years of Mesopotamian civilization, the agricultural techniques, the writing systems, the legal traditions, the astronomical observations, the religious architecture, the trade networks, and it consolidated them, deepened them, built walls around them that were thick enough to hold a city's entire identity inside. Babylon became, at its height, something like a summary of everything that had been learned about how to live together on this particular piece of earth. A great, slow compilation of human experience, written not on paper but in mud, brick, and river water, and the long unbroken chain of memory that runs from teacher to student, from parent to child, from one generation of scribes to the next. The rivers made all of this possible. And the rivers are still there, changed, diminished, rerouted by modern engineering and decades of drought and the slow alterations of a warming world, but still moving, still carrying silt down from the mountains, still shaping the flat land through which they pass. If you flew over southern Iraq tonight, you would see them from above, two dark threads crossing the pale plain, catching whatever light the night offers and holding it for a moment before moving on. The same rivers that watered the first gardens of the first farmers who planted their seeds in the dark soil 4,000 years before the birth of Christ. The same rivers that carried the boats that brought the cedar for the temples. The same rivers that moved through the heart of the greatest city in the ancient world, cold and quiet and indifferent to everything that happened on their banks, the way water is always indifferent, the way time itself is indifferent, not cruel, not cold in the emotional sense, but simply continuous, simply moving, simply following the shape of the land toward the sea. Rest here for a moment. In this landscape, before the walls rise and the kings arrive and the story accelerates into all its complexity, there is just the plain, the sky, the two rivers moving in the dark. And somewhere in the soft, flat distance, the faint beginning of something that will become, in time, one of the most extraordinary places human hands have ever made. Every city, before it becomes a city, is just a name someone decided to keep using. A settlement becomes a village. A village becomes a town. A town becomes something larger, something that requires walls and administrators and a story about itself, a story that explains why this place, and not some other place, is the center of the world. That story takes time to develop. It accumulates slowly, the way silt accumulates on a riverbank, layer by invisible layer, each one too thin to notice, until one day you look down and realize the ground beneath you is considerably higher than it used to be. Babylon accumulated its story over a very long time. The name itself is worth sitting with for a moment. In the ancient Akkadian language, the city was called Babylon or Babili, a phrase that meant, depending on how you translate it, something like Gate of the Gods or Gate of God. The Babylonians believed their city was not merely a human construction but a threshold, a place where the boundary between the earthly and the divine was thinner than elsewhere, where the gods could be reached, where the noise and confusion of the mortal world gave way to something more ordered, more purposeful, more permanent. The name was not boastful. It was, in the way of very old names, simply descriptive. This is what this place is. This is what it has always been. But before Babylon knew its own name, it was something else entirely. The earliest settlements in the region that would become Babylon go back to a period so remote that the archaeological record becomes a series of suggestions rather than statements, traces of fired clay and ash and the compressed outlines of walls that have been folded back into the earth so completely that only the most careful excavation can distinguish them from the surrounding soil. People lived here, in some form, in the late 4th millennium before the Common Era, which is to say, more than 5,000 years ago, though what their settlement looked like, what they called it, what gods they prayed to and whatever shelter they built against the heat, we do not entirely know. They left traces rather than records. The kind of history that can only be read with a brush and a great deal of patience. What we do know is that the city existed, in a recognizable form, well before the 2nd millennium began. Before the great kings arrived. Before the walls. Before the name had the weight it would eventually carry. In those early centuries, Babylon was not yet powerful. It was one of many small cities scattered across the Mesopotamian plain, each one centered on its temple, each one surrounded by fields that required irrigation to produce anything at all, each one ruled by a governor or a local administrator who answered to a larger power, because in this period, the dominant powers in Mesopotamia were elsewhere. Ur had been magnificent. Uruk had been ancient and proud. The Akkadian Empire, under Sargon the Great, had swept through the region several centuries before Babylon's rise and imposed, for a time, the first truly unified political structure the world had ever seen, a single ruler over a territory so large it required an entirely new way of thinking about what kingship meant. That empire collapsed, as empires do. And in the slow, complicated period that followed, a period of fragmentation and realignment, of smaller kingdoms asserting themselves in the spaces left by larger ones, Babylon began to find its footing. The city came under the control of a dynasty known to historians as the Amorites, a people whose origins lay to the west, in the Syrian desert, and who had been filtering into Mesopotamia for generations, settling and intermarrying and gradually becoming indistinguishable from the people they had arrived among. The Amorites did not arrive as destroyers. They arrived as settlers, as farmers, as people looking for land and stability, and in Babylon they found a city small enough to take, and central enough to matter. Around 1894 before the Common Era, a date that historians have reconstructed from ancient king lists and astronomical records with as much precision as the evidence allows, an Amorite king named Sumobum declared Babylon an independent city-state. That declaration would not have seemed, at the time, like the beginning of anything in particular. It was a small political act, of the kind that happened regularly across the Mesopotamian plain, as local strongmen consolidated power over particular cities and their surrounding farmland, and then competed with other strongmen over water rights and trade routes and the loyalty of the gods. The world of early second millennium Mesopotamia was full of such declarations, such consolidations, such small kingdoms rising and pressing against each other like bubbles in a slow current. Babylon was one among many. Its new king was one among many. The future of the city was not yet written in the way that, looking back, we might be tempted to imagine it was. And yet, something about this place was already different. Something about the position, the location near the center of the alluvial plain, close to the junction of important trade routes, within reach of the Euphrates and its traffic, gave Babylon an advantage that was geographic before it was political. The city sat where things passed through, where merchants stopped for the night, where grain was transferred from one boat to another, where information traveled because people traveled, where the accumulation of small commercial interactions over many years produced a density of connection that became, in time, a kind of wealth that was harder to quantify than silver but more durable than any single season's harvest. The early kings of Babylon, Sumobum and his successors, a line of Amorite rulers who passed the city from father to son across several generations, understood this, at least intuitively. They built walls. They maintained the temples. They managed the agricultural land with enough competence that the city did not starve in the years when the floods were wrong. They conducted diplomacy and warfare in roughly equal measure, absorbing neighboring territories when the opportunity arose and defending their own when it did not. They were, in the way of all successful early rulers, pragmatic men doing the slow, unglamorous work of keeping a city alive and growing. We do not know their faces. We do not know the sound of their voices, the language in which they argued with their advisors or spoke to their children in the evening when the lamps were lit and the day's business was concluded. A few of their names survive in tablets, in the formulas of legal documents and the records of temple offerings. Sumobum, Sumalael, Sabium, Apelsin, Sinmubalit. Names that are now mostly known only to specialists, to the scholars who spend their working lives moving quietly through ancient Babylonian records the way a reader moves through a very long book. But these men, whose names we struggle to pronounce and whose faces we cannot picture, built something that outlasted them enormously. They built the foundation. Not the dramatic foundation of a single great act or a single great vision, but the quiet, cumulative foundation of city administered with enough care over enough generations that it developed its own momentum, its own gravity, its own capacity to attract people and resources and ideas from the surrounding world. A city that worked. A city that produced surplus and maintained order and kept its agreements and repaired its walls when the rains damaged them and rebuilt its temples when the floods crept too high. A city learning, slowly, to believe in itself. There is something worth noticing in that kind of beginning. In the long, unspectacular accumulation of small competences that precedes greatness. We tend to remember the great moments, the conquests, the monuments, the proclamations. We remember Hammurabi, whom we will come to soon, and Nebuchadnezzar, who towers over Babylonian history the way the ziggurat towered over the city's rooftops. But before them, there were 5 generations of kings whose contribution was simply to keep things going. To not fail. To pass on to the next king a city that was marginally stronger, marginally larger, marginally more sure of its own identity than it had been when they received it. That is not a small thing. That is, in many ways, the actual work of civilization, the unsung, unrecorded, unglamorous maintenance of what has been built, the daily choosing of continuity over collapse, the steady hands that hold things together through the ordinary difficulties that destroy most attempts to build something lasting before they have a chance to become remarkable. The early kings of Babylon held those steady hands. And in the warmth of the Mesopotamian evening, in the soft yellow light of oil lamps burning in the houses that lined the city's slowly widening streets, in the smell of bread and river water and the particular dusty warmth of a plain that has absorbed the heat of the day and is now releasing it gently back into the cooling air, the city continued. Growing. Deepening. Learning its own name, and beginning, very slowly, to understand what that name might one day mean. The river moved past in the dark. The fields lay quiet beyond the walls. And somewhere in a room we cannot see, a king's son was learning to read. There is a piece of black stone in Paris. It stands in the Louvre, in a room that receives visitors from every corner of the world, and it has been standing, in one place or another, in one city or another, for nearly 4,000 years. It is taller than a man. It is shaped like a pointed pillar, narrow at the top and wider at the base, carved from a single piece of diorite so dark it appears almost to absorb the light around it rather than reflect it. Near the top, carved in shallow relief, 2 figures face each other, one seated, one standing, the seated figure holding out what appears to be a rod and a ring, ancient symbols of divine authority being passed from the hand of a god into the hand of a king. And below that image, covering nearly every inch of the remaining surface in careful, dense columns of cuneiform script, are the laws. 282 of them. The stone is called the Stele of Hammurabi, and it is one of the most extraordinary objects that survives from the ancient world, not because it is beautiful, though it is, and not because it is old, though it is among the oldest legal documents we possess, but because of what it contains. A record of how one civilization, at a particular moment in its development, decided to answer one of the most enduring and difficult questions that any group of human beings has ever had to face. How do we live together without destroying each other? Hammurabi came to the throne of Babylon around 1792 before the Common Era, the 6th king of the Amorite dynasty, the son of Sin-Muballit, whose name we mentioned in passing in the last chapter, and who left his son a city that was ready, finally, to become something larger than itself. The early kings had done their quiet work. The walls were strong. The granaries were maintained. The city had accumulated enough of everything, enough population, enough agricultural surplus, enough political weight, that the right king, at the right moment, could transform it from a competent regional power into something that would echo through history for the next 4,000 years. Hammurabi was that king. But let us not approach him the way conquest is usually approached, with noise and momentum and the sense of inevitability that retrospect always lends to the actions of people who turned out to matter. Let us approach him the way you might approach a fire burning in a quiet room on a cold night. Slowly. With attention. Feeling the warmth before you try to understand the source of it. He ruled for 42 years. 42 years is a long time to be responsible for a city. Long enough to see children grow into adults who have children of their own. Long enough to watch the Euphrates flood and recede 30 or 40 times, to preside over 30 or 40 harvests, to make 30 or 40 years of decisions large and small about trade and warfare and diplomacy and the internal administration of a city that was, by the time of his reign, becoming one of the most populous places on earth. Hammurabi conducted military campaigns that extended Babylonian control across a large portion of Mesopotamia, absorbing Uar, Larsa, Eshnunna, Mari, and others into what became, for a time, the most powerful political entity in the region. He was, by any measure, a successful conqueror. But the stone in Paris is not about conquest. The stone in Paris is about bread. About the price of a day's labor. About what happens when a builder constructs a house that collapses and kills the owner. About the rights of a woman whose husband has been captured by an enemy army and who must decide whether to wait or to remarry. About the fee a doctor may charge for setting a broken bone. About the responsibilities of a tavern keeper and the obligations of a shepherd, and the precise legal situation of a man who has borrowed silver and cannot repay it. The laws are, in the most literal sense, a portrait of daily life in Babylon at its height, a detailed, unromanticized, practical account of what people worried about, what they argued over, what they needed the authority of the state to resolve because they could not resolve it themselves. To read them, slowly, in the dark, is to enter a world that is genuinely ancient and genuinely familiar at the same time, because the things that caused conflict in Babylon 4,000 years ago are, in their essence, the same things that cause conflict now. Property and money. Marriage and inheritance. Negligence and responsibility. The gap between what was promised and what was delivered. Consider, for a moment, the laws concerning builders. If a builder builds a house for a man and the house collapses and kills the owner, the builder shall be put to death. If it kills the son of the owner, the son of the builder shall be put to death. If it kills a slave of the owner, the builder shall give the owner a slave of equal value. The principle is clear, even across the enormous distance of time. Those who are responsible for the safety of others must bear the consequences when that safety fails. The builder who cuts corners, who uses weak bricks or insufficient mortar, who takes the payment and does not do the work, that builder is not merely a bad craftsman. He is a danger to the community, and the community has a right to hold him accountable. There is something deeply recognizable in that logic. Or consider the laws concerning wages. A hired laborer, depending on the type of work, is entitled to a specific quantity of grain per day. The rate varies by season. higher during harvest, when demand is greatest, lower during the quieter months. An employer who withholds wages owes the laborer a penalty beyond the original amount. The relationship between a person who works and a person who pays for that work is not a private matter, to be settled however power dictates. It is a matter of law, of social agreement, of the city's interest in maintaining the kind of basic fairness without which the whole apparatus of urban life begins to break down. Again, not so different from conversations that happen in every city in the world today. The laws also reveal, in their careful specificity, the texture of Babylonian society in ways that no other document quite manages. They tell us that Babylon had doctors and surgeons who performed operations with bronze instruments. That it had architects and engineers who designed and oversaw construction projects. That it had merchants who traveled long distances on behalf of wealthier principals, carrying silver and goods along trade routes that connected Babylon to the Persian Gulf and beyond. That it had taverns, actual taverns, places where people went to drink beer and spend time in company, run typically by women, who were themselves a recognized category of business owner with specific legal rights and responsibilities. It had barbers, boat captains, shepherds who leased their flocks from wealthier owners, farmers who irrigated their fields using water drawn from communal canals and who could be held liable if their negligence flooded a neighbor's land. It had people who rented houses and people who owned them. People who lent money and people who borrowed it. People who adopted children and people who were adopted, with all the complex questions of inheritance and identity that adoption has always produced. It was, in other words, a city of enormous complexity and density, not the simple, undifferentiated mass of ancient people that we sometimes imagine when we think about the distant past, but a stratified, interconnected, endlessly varied community of individuals with different skills and different social positions and different relationships to power and property, all of them navigating the daily demands of life in a place where they were surrounded on all sides by other people doing the same. The laws were carved onto stone pillars, stelae, and placed in public locations throughout the city, so that anyone who could read, and literacy in Babylon was broader than we sometimes assume, could consult them. This was part of the point. Hammurabi did not write the laws merely to impose them. He wrote them, or caused them to be written, to be known, to be seen. The prologue to the code makes this explicit. He wants his people to understand what the law is, so that the strong cannot oppress the weak, so that justice can reach even those without powerful advocates, so that the widow and the orphan, phrases that appear in the text itself, can know what they are owed. Whether Hammurabi fully lived up to that aspiration is a question that history cannot entirely answer. Laws and their enforcement are different things. The existence of a code does not guarantee the existence of justice, any more than the existence of an architectural plan guarantees the existence of a well-built house. But the aspiration itself matters. The fact that this king, at this moment in the development of human civilization, thought it important to have the laws written down and made public, that thought, that impulse toward transparency and accountability, is not nothing. It is, in fact, something. It is the beginning of something we have been arguing about, imperfectly and continuously, ever since. After Hammurabi died, around 1750 before the Common Era, the empire he had built began to contract. His successors maintained Babylon itself, but the territories he had absorbed gradually reasserted their independence, and within a few generations the city had returned to something closer to a regional power than a continental one. Eventually, around 1595, a people called the Hittites swept down from Anatolia in a raid so sudden and so devastating that it ended the Amorite dynasty entirely, carrying off the statue of Marduk, Babylon's chief god, as a trophy of their victory. The city was not destroyed, but it was diminished. For centuries after Hammurabi, Babylon passed through difficult hands. The Kassites, who ruled for an extraordinarily long period but left relatively little mark on the city's character, and various other powers who controlled it, extracted from it, and moved on. There were long stretches of Babylonian history during this period that are only faintly illuminated by the surviving record, quiet centuries, in which the city continued to exist and to function and to maintain its temples and its scribal schools and its identity, without producing the kind of events that later historians could easily organize into a narrative. In those quiet centuries, the stone with the laws continued to stand. Or some version of it did. Copies were made, carried to other cities, preserved in libraries that were themselves eventually buried and forgotten. The knowledge was kept alive in the way that important knowledge tends to survive even difficult periods, through the patient, unglamorous work of scribes who copied old texts into new clay, who taught their students what their teachers had taught them, who maintained the thread of continuity even when the political world around them was uncertain and the future was difficult to read. Somewhere in a school in Babylon, a student was copying out the laws of Hammurabi onto a clay tablet, pressing each wedge-shaped mark into the soft surface with a reed stylus, mouthing the words quietly as he worked, learning by repetition the principles that his civilization had decided were worth preserving. The lamp beside him burned steadily. Outside, the Euphrates moved past in the dark, carrying its cargo of water and silt southward toward the sea, indifferent as always to the human business conducted on its banks, the trade and the argument, the justice and the injustice, the long, slow, imperfect attempt to build a world in which people could live together without entirely destroying each other. The student pressed his stylus into the clay. The laws held their shape. The city wakes before the sun does. Not all at once, not with any single sound that announces the beginning of the day, but gradually, the way sleep releases a person gradually, in stages, the body becoming aware of itself in pieces before the mind catches up and remembers where it is and what is required of it. First there is a dog somewhere, and then another answering it from further away. Then the sound of a wooden door being pulled open against the resistance of a leather hinge dried stiff by months of summer heat. Then a voice, low, unhurried, speaking in Akkadian to someone inside a house, the words indistinct, the tone of them utterly ordinary, the tone of someone telling another person that the morning has arrived and it is time to begin. Babylon in the morning smells of several things at once. There is the river, always, the particular smell of the Euphrates, which is not an unpleasant smell but a complex one, layered with silt and reed beds and the faintly mineral quality of water that has traveled a long distance through varied land before arriving here. There is the smell of cook fires beginning, the sharp, clean smell of wood smoke mixing with the heavier, earthier smell of dried dung fuel, which burns slower and longer and was the more common choice in a landscape where trees were scarce and every piece of burnable material had a value. There is the smell of animals, donkeys and oxen, kept in the courtyards of houses or in the narrow spaces between buildings, their presence a fact of daily life so ordinary that no one would have thought to mention it, in the same way that no one now thinks to mention the smell of vehicle exhaust on a city street because it has simply become part of what a city smells like. And underneath all of it, persistent and warm, the smell of bread. Bread was the foundation of Babylonian life in a way that is difficult to fully appreciate from the distance of a world in which food arrives in abundance from 1,000 different sources, and the question of what to eat has become largely a question of preference rather than survival. In Babylon, bread, and the grain from which it was made, was everything. It was nutrition. It was currency. Wages were paid in grain. Temple offerings were made in grain. The great institutions of the city, the temples, the palaces, the administrative centers, were organized in large part around the reception, storage, distribution, and accounting of grain in quantities that required armies of scribes to record and warehouses the size of city blocks to hold. The bread that ordinary people ate was dense and flat, made from emmer wheat or barley ground between stone mills, a laborious process that produced flour of varying quality depending on the care taken and the quality of the grain. Barley bread was the more common variety, emmer wheat being slightly more prized and therefore slightly more likely to appear on tables that could afford the difference. The dough was mixed with water and sometimes with sesame oil, which grew abundantly in the region, and was pressed and used for cooking, for lamp fuel, for medicinal purposes, and for the anointing of sacred objects in the temples. The loaves were baked in clay ovens, round, domed structures set into the ground or built against the exterior walls of houses, their interiors blackened by years of use, their surfaces worn smooth by the repeated press of hands placing unbaked loaves inside and drawing baked ones out again. The person most likely to be doing that work, in the early morning hours before the city had fully woken, was a woman. Babylonian society was not a society of equals. No ancient society was, and most modern ones fall considerably short of that aspiration as well, but it was a society in which women occupied a more varied and in some respects more recognized position than popular imagination often allows for when picturing the ancient world. Women managed households. They ran businesses. The taverns of Babylon, as the laws of Hammurabi make clear, were commonly operated by women who brewed and sold beer, maintained the premises, and were held legally accountable for the conduct of their establishments. Women could own property, enter into contracts, initiate divorce under certain conditions, and appear in legal proceedings as witnesses or as parties to disputes. None of this made them equal to men in the eyes of Babylonian law or Babylonian custom. But it made them present, in the record, in a way that complicates the simple picture of ancient women as entirely invisible and entirely powerless. They were there. They were working. And their work, the grinding of grain, the baking of bread, the brewing of beer, the raising of children, the management of the domestic economy that made everything else possible, was not merely background noise to the official history of kings and campaigns. It was the actual texture of the city's life. Let us walk through that city for a while. The streets of Babylon were not laid out in the regular grid that later city planners would favor, the kind of rational, right-angled street plan that speaks of a city designed from above, from a position of control. Babylon's streets had grown organically, the way streets do in cities that develop over centuries without a single governing vision, each new building fitting itself into the space available, each new alleyway following the path of least resistance between the structures already standing. The result was a network of passages that ranged from the broad ceremonial avenues, the processional way being the most magnificent of these, wide enough for large ritual processions to move through with full ceremony, to the narrow, irregular lanes that wound between mud brick houses in the residential quarters, sometimes barely wide enough for two people to pass each other comfortably. The houses themselves were built to a logic that the climate demanded. Mud brick was the primary building material, not because it was considered inferior to stone, but because stone was scarce on the alluvial plain and mud was not, and because mud brick, properly made and properly maintained, was an entirely functional building material in a climate of hot dry summers and mild wet winters. The bricks were made from the dark silt of the riverbanks, mixed with chopped straw to bind them, shaped in wooden molds, and left in the sun to dry, a process that produced blocks of considerable weight and density that could be stacked into walls thick enough to keep the interior of a house significantly cooler than the air outside during the worst of the summer heat. The typical house of a middle-class Babylonian family was organized around a central courtyard, an open space in the heart of the structure that served as the primary living area during the mild seasons, a source of light for the rooms arranged around it, and a circulation point for whatever breeze the flat landscape managed to generate. The rooms opening off the courtyard were used for sleeping, for storage, for the preparation of food. There might be a second story, reached by a staircase of baked brick, where sleeping quarters were positioned to catch whatever cooler air moved at higher elevation during the summer nights. The courtyard would have held the family's clay oven, a storage jar or several for water and grain, perhaps a few wooden stools or low benches, and in the evenings, when the day's heat had begun to ease, the whole domestic life of the family, eating, conversation, the supervision of children, the reception of neighbors, would have moved outside and settled in that open central space under the enormous Mesopotamian sky. If there was a garden, it was small and practical. Herbs for cooking and medicine, coriander, cumin, garlic, onions. Perhaps a fig tree, if the courtyard was large enough to sustain one, its roots drawing moisture from the deep soil, its leaves casting a shade so welcome in summer that a tree like that would have been considered something close to a luxury, a form of wealth that expressed itself not in silver or lapis lazuli but in the simple, immeasurable currency of coolness and shadow. Beyond the house, the city. The market districts of Babylon were among the most alive parts of the city, places of noise and movement and the particular organized chaos of commercial exchange conducted by many people simultaneously in a relatively confined space. Merchants set out their goods on mats or low wooden platforms. Vendors of food moved through the crowd selling prepared items, roasted grain, small flatbreads, dried dates pressed into blocks, cups of beer drawn from large clay vessels. Animals were bought and sold in designated areas that were loud with the voices of the animals and the voices of the people arguing over their prices. Cloth merchants laid out their wares, linen and wool in various qualities, the finer grades dyed with mineral and plant pigments in colors that required skill and materials to produce and therefore cost correspondingly more. Silver was the medium of exchange for larger transactions, weighed out on small balance scales that merchants carried with them, the weights themselves being objects of considerable importance since a merchant whose weights were heavier than standard could effectively steal from every customer he served. The laws of Hammurabi addressed this with characteristic specificity. Honest waits were a matter of public interest, not merely private morality. The city had a stake in the integrity of every scale used within its walls. Smaller transactions were conducted in grain or in kind, a quantity of barley exchanged for a quantity of oil, a service rendered in exchange for food, the elaborate system of mutual obligation and informal credit that ran beneath and alongside the official economy of silver and legal contract. A neighbor helped with a harvest and was fed for the duration. A craftsman repaired a tool and received a meal and a small quantity of grain. The formal and the informal were not separate systems but different layers of the same system, woven together in ways that a legal code could regulate at the margins but could not entirely capture. In the afternoon, when the heat reached its most serious intensity, the city quieted. This is something worth imagining, the quality of a hot afternoon in Babylon, when the sun pressed down on the mud brick walls and the streets emptied of all but the most necessary traffic, and even the animals stood still in whatever shadow they could find. Inside the houses, people rested. Children slept on woven reed mats in the shade of the courtyard walls. Adults lay in the cooler interior rooms, their breathing slow, their bodies surrendered to the particular deep rest that extreme heat produces, the kind of sleep that feels heavier and more complete than ordinary sleep, as though the body has made an agreement with the temperature to simply stop until conditions improve. Later, as the afternoon softened and the shadows lengthened and the heat began, almost imperceptibly, to release its grip, the city woke again. The cook fires were relit. The smell of onions and cumin and sesame oil drifted across the courtyards. Children reappeared in the streets. The sound of conversation returned, and with it the sound of a city in the process of ending its day in the way it had ended thousands of days before, with food and talk and the slow unwinding of the particular tensions and satisfactions that each day produces in the people who have lived through it. The lamps were lit as the darkness came. Not many lamps. Oil was expensive enough to be used with care, and the Babylonian night was not a night of bright interiors and extended evening activity but a night of early rest, the body following the rhythm of light and dark with an obedience that artificial illumination has almost entirely dismantled in the modern world. The flame of a single small lamp, a clay vessel with a wick of twisted fiber floating in a pool of sesame oil, was enough to see by in a small room, enough to continue necessary work for an hour or two after sunset, enough to hold the darkness at a comfortable distance while the family gathered and the day concluded. Outside, the city lay under the stars. The enormous sky that had been visible all day, that flat, uninterrupted sky above the Mesopotamian plain, was now filled from edge to edge with light. Not the thin, compromised light of a sky polluted by the glow of a million electric lamps, but the full, dense, overwhelming light of a sky that had never had to compete with anything. Stars from horizon to horizon. The Milky Way visible as a distinct structure, a broad river of light crossing the dark, dense enough to cast a faint shadow on pale ground. Somewhere above the rooftops, from the high terrace of the Great Ziggurat, a priest was watching that sky with careful, trained attention. But that is a story for a little later. For now, let the city rest. The fires are low. The streets are quiet. The Euphrates moves past in the dark, carrying its cold water southward through the warm night. In a courtyard somewhere in the middle of the city, a fig tree stands in the last warmth of the day, its leaves completely still, its roots deep in the dark and patient soil. A door closes softly. A lamp goes out. And Babylon breathes, slowly, in the dark. Above the city, there is another city. Not built of mud, brick, and timber and the accumulated debris of centuries of daily life, but built of light, of the particular, ancient, overwhelming light that fills the Mesopotamian sky on a clear night when the moon has not yet risen and the plain stretches away in every direction without interruption, without a hill or a forest or a distant glow of any human settlement to soften the darkness at the edges. This city of light has no walls and no streets and no markets. It has no kings whose names are written on clay tablets, no laws carved into black stone, no granaries or ovens or narrow alleyways smelling of cook fires and animal warmth. It has only its own slow movement, the patient, imperceptible wheeling of 10,000 points of light across the dome of the dark, turning through the night the way a millstone turns, steadily and without rest, in a direction that is always the same, at a pace that never varies. The Babylonians watched that city with extraordinary attention. They watched it the way a person watches something they believe contains a message, with patience, with care, with the particular quality of attention that comes from understanding that the message, if it exists, will only reveal itself to those who are willing to look long enough and carefully enough and without the distraction of their own assumptions about what they expect to find. They watched it for centuries. For millennia. Generation after generation of trained observers climbing the steps of the great ziggurat as the sun went down and the first stars appeared, taking their positions on the high terrace in the cooling air, opening their clay tablets to the section where the previous night's observations had been recorded, and beginning again. Let us climb those steps now. The Ziggurat of Babylon, known in ancient sources as Edamananki, a Sumerian phrase that meant something like house of the foundation of heaven and earth, was the tallest structure in the city and one of the tallest structures in the ancient world. It rose in a series of receding terraces, each one smaller than the one below, like a great stepped mountain built by human hands on a plain that had no mountains of its own. Ancient sources describe it as having 7 levels, though the archaeological evidence, complicated by centuries of later building and demolition and the eventual complete dismantling of the structure by various ancient kings and conquerors who found its baked bricks useful for other purposes, makes the exact dimensions difficult to confirm with precision. What we can say is that it was enormous. Enormous in the way that very few human constructions manage to be, not merely large in the way a big building is large, but large in a way that altered the experience of the city around it, that could be seen from a considerable distance across the flat plain, that served as an orientation point for travelers approaching Babylon from any direction, that rose above the city's rooftops the way a cliff face rises above a beach, changing the quality of the space around it simply by being there. The ziggurat was the vertical axis of a horizontal world. In a landscape where everything was flat, the fields, the streets, the river, the horizon in every direction, the ziggurat was the one thing that insisted on height, on verticality, on the possibility of elevation. This was not accidental. The theology that the ziggurat embodied was a theology of connection, the idea that the divine and the human, the heavenly and the earthly, were not entirely separate realms but could be brought into relationship with each other through the mediation of sacred architecture. The gods, in Babylonian understanding, did not live in the human world. They lived elsewhere, in the sky, in the deep waters beneath the earth, in realms that were adjacent to the human world but not identical to it. The ziggurat was, in its essential conception, a ladder. A structure designed to reduce the distance between where the gods were and where the people who needed to speak to them were. At the top of that ladder, in a small temple chamber that ancient sources describe as simply furnished but carefully maintained, the god was believed to descend and rest. Not permanently, not reliably, but potentially, on nights when the proper rituals had been performed, when the proper offerings had been made, when the priests had done their work with sufficient care and the alignment of the heavens was favorable. The chamber at the summit was not a place of public worship. It was a place of divine residence, accessible only to the most senior priests, and even then only under specific sacred conditions. Everything below the summit was preparation for that possibility. The priests of Babylon occupied a position in Babylonian society that was not quite like anything in the modern world, not simply religious specialists in the way that clergy function in contemporary religious traditions, but something more comprehensive, more embedded in the practical life of the city. The temples of Babylon were economic institutions as much as religious ones. They owned agricultural land. They employed craftsmen and laborers. They ran schools where the scribes who administered the city's records were trained. They maintained libraries, actual libraries, collections of clay tablets inscribed with religious texts, astronomical observations, medical knowledge, mathematical calculations, literary compositions that represented the accumulated intellectual inheritance of Mesopotamian civilization going back, in some cases, many centuries. To be a priest in Babylon was to be, among other things, an administrator, a scholar, a keeper of records, and a trained observer of the natural world. The astronomical observations conducted from the top of the ziggurat were not, in the Babylonian understanding, a separate activity from religious practice. They were religious practice. The sky was a text, and the movements of the sun and the moon and the visible planets, Jupiter, Venus, Saturn, Mars, Mercury, each one associated with a specific deity and a specific domain of divine influence, were the sentences of that text, communicating information about the intentions of the gods toward the human world below. An eclipse of the moon was not merely an astronomical phenomenon. It was a message. Its significance depended on precisely when it occurred, in which month, on which day, during which watch of the night, and on what other celestial phenomena were occurring simultaneously, and on a complex system of interpretive principles that the priestly scholars had developed and refined over generations. A particular conjunction of planets might indicate favorable conditions for a military campaign. A particular behavior of Venus, its disappearance from the evening sky and reappearance as the morning star, carried implications for the agricultural season and for the health of the king. The sky was never neutral. It was always speaking. And so the observations had to be made, every clear night, without exception. Imagine, for a moment, what that was like. The priest has climbed the steps as the light faded, 80 steps, perhaps, or 120, each one worn slightly hollow by the feet of the people who have climbed them before him across the decades and centuries. The city falls away below him as he rises. At the level of the first terrace, he can see over the rooftops of the houses nearest the temple precinct. At the level of the second, the whole residential quarter to the north spreads out in the dimming light, the flat rooftops visible as a geometry of rectangles and squares. By the third terrace, the city walls are visible in their entirety, and beyond them, the flat plain extending to the horizon, the Euphrates a dark ribbon to the west, the last light of the evening gathering above it. At the top, the air is different. Not dramatically different. They are not so high that the temperature drops sharply or that the wind becomes more than a slight increase in what was already moving through the city below. But there is a quality of openness up here that is absent in the streets and courtyards below, a sense of the sky being closer, more present, more immediate. The priest settles into his position, opens his tablet, takes his reed stylus, and waits. The first stars appear while the sky is still pale. The bright ones come first, Sirius, low in the south, steady and slightly blue-white. The stars of the Pleiades, a close cluster that the Babylonians knew well and associated with the calendar of the agricultural year. The great planet Jupiter, if it is present in the evening sky, unmistakably bright and with a steadiness that distinguishes it from the flickering of the true stars. The priest notes what he sees, recording the positions with reference to the constellations, the Babylonian constellations, which are not entirely the same as the ones we use today but share enough in common that a modern astronomer looking at a Babylonian star catalog would recognize a substantial portion of the sky being described. As the night deepens and the sky darkens fully, the stars multiply. The Milky Way comes clear, that broad river of dense light that the flat plain and the complete absence of light pollution make overwhelming rather than merely beautiful. The priest has seen it hundreds of times. He knows it as a feature of the sky the way a sailor knows a particular coastline, familiarly, precisely, with the specific knowledge that comes from long acquaintance rather than from any single dramatic encounter. He knows where the ecliptic runs through it, the path along which the sun and moon and planets move, the great belt of sky that the Babylonians had divided into 12 zones, the origins of what we now call the zodiac, a word derived from Greek but representing a concept that was already ancient in Babylon long before the Greeks arrived to encounter it. He records. He calculates. He compares tonight's observations with the records from previous nights, previous months, previous years, looking for the patterns that emerge only when you have watched long enough. The Babylonian astronomers were, in the truest sense of the word, scientists, not because they were free from religious or metaphysical interpretation, but because their method was fundamentally empirical. They believed the sky contained meaning. They also believed that discovering that meaning required observation, recording, comparison, and calculation. They developed mathematical models, genuinely sophisticated mathematical models, to predict the future positions of the moon and planets based on observed regularities. They calculated the length of the lunar month to a precision that remained unsurpassed in the Western world for more than 1,000 years after their civilization had ceased to exist. They identified the cycle of lunar eclipses, a pattern that repeats over a period of approximately 18 years, and could predict, on the basis of that pattern, when eclipses were likely to occur. This was not primitive stargazing. This was systematic inquiry, conducted with limited instruments but extraordinary patience, over a time span measured not in years or decades but in centuries. The records that survive, written on clay tablets that were copied and recopied in the scribal schools and eventually ended up, after the fall of Babylon, in collections that scattered to various corners of the ancient world, represent the oldest continuous astronomical database in human history. When modern historians of science examine these records, they find not only careful observation but genuine mathematical insight, the recognition of periodic patterns, the development of arithmetic models to describe those patterns, the use of those models to extend observation into prediction. All of it conducted by men on the tops of towers, in the dark, with reed styli and clay tablets, and the patient intelligence of people who understood that the world revealed its structures only to those willing to attend to it for a very long time. The night moves above them. Slowly, with the same stately indifference that has always characterized it, the sky turns. The stars that were at the zenith when the priest arrived have moved westward, descending toward the horizon. New stars have risen in the east. The moon, if it is present, has traced its own arc across the dark. The priest records the final observations of the night, the position of Jupiter as it approaches the western horizon, the behavior of a particular star he has been watching for 3 consecutive nights, a note about the condition of the sky, whether the seeing was good or interrupted by thin cloud, whether the air was steady or trembling with heat. Then he covers his tablet, places his stylus beside it, and stands. Below him, the city lies in near darkness. The cook fires have gone out. The lamps in the houses have been extinguished one by one as the night deepened and the families inside them surrendered to sleep. The streets are empty and silent. The Euphrates catches the starlight along its surface and carries it southward without interest. The priest stands at the top of the ladder between earth and heaven, in the cooling air of a Mesopotamian night that ended 3,000 years ago, and looks at the stars with the particular quality of attention that a lifetime of looking has produced, not wonder exactly, not the wonder of someone encountering something unfamiliar, but something deeper and quieter than wonder. The recognition of a familiar presence. The comfort of something that has always been there and will always be there, moving in its patient circles above whatever the human world below is doing, its arguments and its harvests, its kings and its wars, its markets and its laws and its small domestic lives playing out in the darkness beneath the enormous and indifferent sky. He descends the stairs as the first gray light begins to gather at the eastern edge of the plain. The city stirs below him. The day is beginning again. Not everyone who lived in Babylon chose to be there. This is a fact worth holding gently, without letting it harden into anything sharp, without letting it become an argument or an accusation or the beginning of a story about villains and victims, because history, when you sit inside it long enough, rarely resolves into those clean shapes. It is more complicated than that, and more human than that, and in its complication it is, paradoxically, more moving than the simplified version would be. There were people in Babylon who had been brought there against their will, who walked through the same streets we have been walking through, who looked up at the same ziggurat rising against the same enormous sky, who smelled the same bread and river water and cook smoke, and who felt, in the midst of all that sensory richness, a grief so specific and so deep that it produced some of the most beautiful writing about loss and longing that human beings have ever set down. We are going to spend some time with that grief tonight. Not to dwell in it, not to let the weight of it press too heavily on this quiet hour, but to hold it the way you hold something fragile and important, carefully, with both hands, understanding that the fragility is part of what makes it worth holding at all. In the early 6th century before the Common Era, the king of Babylon was a man named Nebuchadnezzar II, a figure so large in history that we will spend an entire chapter with him later, when we come to the height of Babylonian civilization and the magnificent structures he caused to be built. But tonight we approach him not through the grandeur of his construction projects but through a consequence of his military campaigns that unfolded quietly, over years, in the lives of people who had no particular interest in being part of anyone's military campaign. The kingdom of Judah, to the west of Babylon, had been a vassal state, a smaller political entity that existed in the orbit of larger powers and was required to pay tribute and maintain political loyalty in exchange for being permitted to continue existing. When Judah's king made the mistake of withholding tribute and seeking alliance with Egypt, Babylon's rival, Nebuchadnezzar responded the way powerful kings responded to such decisions. He sent his army. Jerusalem fell in 597 before the Common Era. And then again, more completely, in 586. The second fall was devastating in the way that second falls tend to be, not the shock of the first encounter with overwhelming force, but the worst thing, the confirmation that the first time was not an aberration, not a storm that had passed, but the beginning of a transformation that was going to be permanent. The city's walls were broken. The temple, the great Temple of Solomon, the center of Judean religious and national identity, the physical location of the divine presence in the Israelite understanding of the world, was destroyed. And the people, or a significant portion of them, the educated, the skilled, the administratively useful, were gathered and taken east, along the long road across the desert and the river, to Babylon. The journey would have taken weeks. There is almost no way to imagine it adequately from the distance we occupy. The physical fact of it, the walking, the heat, the dust of the road, the carrying of whatever could be carried and the leaving behind of everything that could not, is challenging enough to contemplate. But beneath the physical fact was something harder to articulate and harder to endure. The knowledge that the place you were leaving was gone. Not temporarily vacated, not merely distant in the way that home is distant when you travel and can be returned to. Gone in the more final sense, altered beyond recognition, stripped of the things that made it itself, no longer available to return to in the form you had known it. They carried that knowledge with them, along the road, into Babylon. And then they arrived. What did they see? The gates of Babylon, for anyone approaching from the west along the main processional road, were the Ishtar Gate, a structure of extraordinary beauty that we will describe in more detail in the chapter to come, but which even in brief description communicates something of the impact it must have had on a traveler seeing it for the first time. It was enormous. It was covered in glazed brick of a blue so deep and so saturated that it seemed almost impossible, a blue that had no equivalent in the natural landscape of the region, a blue that announced, deliberately and unmistakably, that the power behind this gate had access to resources and craft and organizational capacity on a scale that most of the ancient world could not match. The gate was decorated with animals in relief, dragons and bulls, the symbols of Babylon's gods, rendered in brick of gold and white against that impossible blue ground, and they processed in rows along the surface of the gate and along the walls of the processional way that led from it into the heart of the city. It was magnificent. And it was not home. This is the particular cruelty of exile that no amount of magnificence can address, that beauty in a strange place does not console, or consoles only briefly and incompletely, in the way that a warm fire consoles a person who is lost, giving them comfort without giving them direction. The exiles from Judah walked through the Ishtar Gate and into Babylon and found themselves inside one of the most extraordinary cities in the world. And they were not home. The Hebrew scriptures preserve something of what this felt like. Among the most ancient and most enduring pieces of writing that survive from this period is a psalm, Psalm 137, that begins with one of the most quietly devastating opening lines in all of literature. It describes the exiles sitting beside the rivers of Babylon, weeping, remembering Jerusalem. Their harps hang in the willow trees, unplayed, because their captors have asked them to sing the songs of their homeland and they cannot. How can we sing the songs of our homeland, the psalm asks, in a foreign land? That question contains everything. It contains the grief of displacement, not the sharp grief of sudden loss, but the duller, more persistent grief of absence, the grief of a person who wakes every morning in the wrong place and falls asleep every night in the wrong place and moves through their days surrounded by the wrong sounds and the wrong smells and the wrong quality of light. It contains the particular anguish of being asked to perform your own culture for the entertainment of those who have power over you, to produce, on demand, the music and the tradition and the living expression of everything you are, in a context that reduces it to spectacle. It contains the stubbornness of refusal, the decision that some things are too precious to perform under those conditions, that grief has its own dignity, that the harps will hang in the trees until the conditions for playing them properly have been restored. It also contains something that is easy to miss, reading quickly, a profound attentiveness to place. The rivers of Babylon. The willow trees. The psalm does not describe Babylon abstractly, as a concept or a symbol. It describes a specific physical location, the sound of water, the presence of trees, the particular sensory reality of a place that the exiles have learned, despite themselves, to notice. Because this is what humans do, even in the worst circumstances. They notice where they are. They learn the details of their surroundings even when those surroundings are not where they want to be. The rivers of Babylon are real rivers in this psalm, running through a real city, and the exiles are sitting beside them in real grief. Life, in the meantime, continued. The Babylonian exile was not, for most of those who experienced it, a condition of imprisonment in the physical sense. The exiles were not held in cells or kept behind walls beyond the walls that bounded the city itself. They were settled in communities, some near Babylon, some in other parts of Babylonia, and permitted to conduct their lives with a degree of normalcy that the word exile might not immediately suggest. They farmed land. They conducted business. They married and had children. They maintained their religious practices and their community structures and the transmission of their traditions from one generation to the next. Some of them prospered. This is one of the more complicated aspects of the exile, and one that the simple narrative of captivity tends to smooth over. The evidence, from Babylonian administrative records that have survived, from later biblical texts, from the archaeological record, suggests that at least some of the Judean exiles found opportunities in Babylon that would not have been available to them in a smaller, less complex economy. They became merchants, administrators, craftsmen. Their names appear in business documents alongside Babylonian names, conducting transactions, entering into partnerships, accumulating property. The city absorbed them the way large cities absorb people, partially, incompletely, but with a practical inclusiveness that the language of exile, with its emphasis on separation and grief, does not entirely capture. And yet the longing persisted. In the religious texts composed during this period, the writings that would eventually become part of the Hebrew Bible, shaped and edited and given their final form in part during the years in Babylon, there is a current of homesickness that runs through everything like a river running underground, not always visible at the surface but always present, always moving, always oriented in the same direction. Toward Jerusalem. Toward the destroyed temple. Toward a place that had been broken and might, if the theology was right and the faithfulness was sufficient, be restored. The experience of the exile transformed Judaism in ways that cannot be overstated. Separated from the temple that had been the center of their religious practice, the exiles were forced to develop new ways of maintaining their identity and their relationship with their God, ways that did not depend on a particular physical location, on sacrifices conducted in a particular sacred space, on the rituals that could only be performed in the presence of the Ark of the Covenant in its proper chamber. The synagogue, the gathering place, the community of shared reading and prayer that could be established anywhere a community existed, has its origins, in some form, in this period. The intensive study and preservation of Scripture, the understanding that the texts themselves could carry the identity and the tradition in the absence of the temple and the land, became central in a way it had not been before. Babylon, in other words, by destroying what the exiles had, forced them to create something that would outlast not only the exile itself but Babylon, and the Persian Empire that conquered Babylon, and the Greek Empire that superseded Persia, and the Roman Empire that eventually destroyed the Second Temple in Jerusalem. Something portable and durable and not dependent on any particular king's protection or any particular city's continued existence. The harps came down from the trees, eventually. Not in Babylon, not while the exile lasted. But they came down. The music was preserved. The texts were copied and studied and argued over in ways that gave them a life and a complexity and a richness that they might not have developed in easier circumstances, in a world where everything was stable and the temple stood and the tradition flowed smoothly from generation to generation without the interruption that forces a tradition to ask itself what it actually is, what it actually requires, what is essential and what is merely habitual. Elsewhere in the city, the lamps burned in the houses. The priests climbed the stairs of the ziggurat as the sun went down. The merchants weighed their silver in the market. The bakers shaped their loaves in the pre-dawn dark and slid them into the clay ovens and waited. The Euphrates moved through the city in its old, unhurried way, indifferent to the grief of the people sitting on its banks, indifferent to the grandeur of the walls rising behind them, carrying its cold water southward through a warm night that was the same for everyone who lived beneath it. In a courtyard somewhere in the city, Babylonian or Judean, it does not matter in this moment, someone was sitting in the dark and looking at the enormous sky. Not thinking about history. Not thinking about exile or empire or the long, complicated story of how they came to be sitting in this particular courtyard on this particular night. Just sitting. Just breathing. Just present in the warm air, beneath the stars, in the city that was not home and was, for now, the only home there was. The night held them gently. As it holds everything, eventually. The grief and the grandeur both. The city and the longing for the city that is no longer there. The harps in the willow trees and the music that would survive long after the willows were gone. All of it held in the same dark. All of it breathing together, slowly, in the warm Mesopotamian night. There is a blue that does not exist anywhere else in the ancient world. Not in the paintings of Egypt, not in the dyed cloth of the Phoenician merchants who carried their famous purple across the length of the Mediterranean, not in the glazed ceramics of Persia or the lapis lazuli ornaments of Ur. This blue belongs specifically and entirely to Babylon, to a particular moment in Babylon, a particular reign, a particular king who decided that the entrance to his city would be covered in a color so saturated and so deep that everyone who approached it would understand, before they had passed through the gate, before they had seen the temples or the ziggurat or the palace or any of the other extraordinary things the city contained, that they were entering a place of singular power and singular beauty. The king was Nebuchadnezzar II. The gate was the Ishtar Gate. And the blue, achieved through a process of glazing fired brick at high temperature with a compound containing copper and other minerals, a process that required skilled craftsmen and considerable resources and the kind of organizational capacity that only a very powerful state could sustain, was a statement. Not a boastful statement, not the kind of loud proclamation that insecure power tends to make. A quieter statement than that. The statement of something so certain of its own magnificence that it could afford to express that magnificence in beauty rather than in threat. Nebuchadnezzar came to the throne of Babylon in 605 before the Common Era, and he ruled for 43 years, almost exactly as long as Hammurabi, whose reign we considered earlier, and like Hammurabi's reign, his was long enough to leave a mark on the city so deep and so comprehensive that even the passage of 2.5 millennia has not entirely erased it. He was, by the evidence of the records he left, and he left many records, because he was a king who understood the importance of writing things down, a man of considerable intelligence and considerable ambition, and the particular form his ambition took was the form that produces the most durable legacy. He built things. He built constantly, comprehensively, with the focused energy of a person who has decided that the physical form of the city is itself a kind of argument, an argument about what civilization is and what it can achieve and what it looks like when it is functioning at the highest level it is capable of reaching. Let us walk toward the gate. The approach to the Ishtar Gate from the north followed a road called the Processional Way, a broad, ceremonial avenue that served as the spine of Babylon's sacred geography, the path along which the great New Year festival procession moved each spring, carrying the statue of the god Marduk from his temple in the city's interior out through the gate and along the road to the festival house beyond the walls, where the rituals of cosmic renewal were performed. The road was wide enough for the procession in all its elaborateness, the priests and the musicians and the bearers of sacred objects and the crowds of worshippers who followed, to move without constriction, to spread out and fill the space the way a river fills its channel, with a sense of natural inevitability. The walls on either side of the processional way were faced with glazed brick panels, the same technique that produced the blue of the gate, applied here to create a continuous procession of lions in relief, rendered in yellow and white against a deep blue ground, walking in the same direction as the human procession that moved between them each spring. The lions are the symbol of Ishtar, the goddess of love and war, one of the most important deities in the Babylonian pantheon, and their presence lining the road was not merely decorative. They were guardians. They were witnesses. They were the visible manifestation of divine presence in the physical fabric of the city, woven into the walls the way a blessing might be woven into a prayer, not separately, not as an addition to the structure, but as part of its essential nature. You would have felt them as you walked between them. Not fear exactly, though the lions are not gentle images, not the rounded, softened lions of decorative art made for private spaces. These are formal lions, lions rendered with the specificity of observation, their muscles suggested beneath the smooth glaze of their surfaces, their mouths slightly open, their expressions carrying that particular quality of focused, patient attention that large predators have in the moment before they move. Walking between rows of them, even in the context of a festival procession in which you were surrounded by thousands of other people, would have produced a heightened awareness of your own smallness, your own contingency, your own presence in a space that was not primarily designed for human comfort but for something larger than human comfort. And then the gate itself would have appeared before you. The Ishtar Gate stood approximately 14 meters high, though reconstructions and scholarly estimates vary, and it was flanked by two towers that rose higher still, so that the gate sat in a kind of embrace between them, framed and emphasized by the vertical mass on either side. The surface was covered entirely in glazed brick. The blue was everywhere. And against that blue, in alternating rows, the animals, the dragon of Marduk, a serpentine creature with a scaly body, a horned head, and the forelegs of a lion and the hind legs of an eagle, and the bull of Adad, the storm god, massive and controlled, rendered with the same specificity as the lions on the processional way, the muscles of its shoulders visible beneath the glaze, its horns curving outward against the deep blue field. There were 120 lions on the processional way. There were 60 dragons and 60 bulls on the Ishtar Gate. These numbers were not arbitrary. In Babylonian numerology, 60 was the number of Anu, the god of the heavens, the most senior deity in the pantheon, the number from which the Babylonian sexagesimal counting system derived its fundamental structure, the same system that gives us 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, a legacy of Babylonian mathematics that has persisted so completely into the modern world that most people who use it have no idea where it came from. The numbers on the gate were a prayer in brick and glaze, a statement of cosmic alignment. The city was not merely well built. It was correctly built, constructed in accordance with divine proportion, in harmony with the numerical structures that the Babylonian understanding of the universe held to be fundamental. Inside the gate, the city opened. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was a city of approximately 850 hectares enclosed within its outer walls, a vast area by the standards of the ancient world, large enough that a person could spend days moving through it without exhausting its districts and its precincts and its neighborhoods. The palace complex alone covered an area that would have been considered a substantial city in many parts of the ancient world, a series of interconnected courtyards and throne rooms and administrative buildings and residential quarters that sprawled across the northern part of the city in a complex of such scale that it functioned almost as a city within the city. The throne room of Nebuchadnezzar's palace was decorated with glazed brick panels depicting palm trees and lions, the palm a symbol of Babylon and of life itself, the lion the symbol of royal power, in a composition that covered the walls from floor to ceiling in a continuous field of color and pattern. The effect would have been overwhelming in the way that total environments are overwhelming, not the focused impact of a single beautiful object, but the immersive effect of beauty that surrounds you completely, that fills every surface you can see, that makes the air inside a space feel different from the air outside it. This was intentional. The throne room was a space designed to produce a specific experience in the people who entered it, an experience of being inside something larger and more ordered and more magnificent than the ordinary world, an experience that would translate, in the minds of the foreign ambassadors and the vassal kings and the military commanders who were brought before Nebuchadnezzar on his throne, into an understanding of the kind of power they were dealing with. The beauty was not separate from the politics. It was the politics, expressed in the language of color and form and the overwhelming physical fact of a room that told you, before a single word had been spoken, that the person who had built it was not someone to treat lightly. And then there are the gardens. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon occupy a peculiar position in history, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world as listed by later Greek and Roman writers, celebrated across centuries as among the most extraordinary things human beings had ever made, and yet almost entirely absent from the Babylonian records themselves. No Babylonian text that has been found southwest far describes the gardens in anything like the detail that the classical sources provide. No archaeological excavation has definitively identified their location within the city. They exist, in the historical record, primarily as a Greek and Roman memory of something extraordinary, a description of terraced gardens rising from the flat plain, lush with trees and plants and running water, maintained by an elaborate system of irrigation that lifted water from the Euphrates to the highest terraces against the natural direction of gravity. Some historians have suggested the gardens did not exist in Babylon at all, that the classical sources confused them with gardens in Nineveh, the Assyrian capital, where there is better evidence for an elaborate royal garden built by the Assyrian king Sennacherib. Others maintain that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, that Babylon has been incompletely excavated, that the organic material of a garden would leave a more fragile archaeological trace than brick and stone. We cannot resolve this question tonight, but we can hold it gently, as one of the places where history opens into something more uncertain and more beautiful than certainty. The gardens may have existed. They may have been exactly what the ancient writers described, a mountain of greenery rising above the flat rooftops of the city, visible from a distance, a vertical garden in a horizontal world, the sound of water running through it audible on quiet evenings, the smell of flowering trees drifting down into the streets below. If they existed, they would have been built, according to the most romantic version of the tradition, for a woman. The story goes that Nebuchadnezzar built the gardens for his wife, a Median princess named Amadis, who had grown up in the green, mountainous landscape of Media and found the flat brown plain of Babylon oppressive, who missed the hills and the forests and the particular quality of air that exists in elevated places where the trees are tall and the ground is not flat and the horizon is interrupted by shapes other than the straight line of distance. A king building a mountain for his wife because she missed mountains. A king attempting to recreate, in brick and irrigation and the patient labor of gardeners, the landscape of a person's childhood. There is something in that story, whether or not it is literally true, that contains a recognizable human impulse. The impulse to give someone the thing they miss. To understand that homesickness is real and that beauty can address it, imperfectly, partially, but with genuine intention. To build something that says, I understand what you have lost, and I cannot give it back entirely, but I can give you something that gestures toward it, something that will catch the light in the morning and smell of green things and remind you, in the middle of this flat, warm city, that the world contains other kinds of places. The gardens or their absence. The blue gate and its dragons. The throne room with its walls of palm trees. The processional way with its 120 lions walking in the same direction as the worshippers who moved between them each spring. Nebuchadnezzar's Babylon was a city that had decided, consciously and with extraordinary craft and organizational effort, to be as beautiful as it was powerful. To make the two things, beauty and power, inseparable. To build walls that were also arguments. To make gates that were also prayers. To fill the surfaces of the places where people lived and worked and worshipped with images of such quality and care that the act of moving through the city was itself an aesthetic experience, a continuous encounter with the deliberate, sustained intention of a civilization that believed the visible world should reflect the ordered, magnificent structure of the divine world above it. Walking through Babylon at its height, in the reign of Nebuchadnezzar II, would have been like walking through a thought, a large, complex, carefully articulated thought about what human beings were capable of, what the world could look like when sufficient will and sufficient resources were directed toward making it beautiful. The blue of the gate would have been the last thing you saw as you left the city, turning back to look one final time before the road took you away from it and the flat plain swallowed the view. That blue, in the afternoon light, deeper than the sky above it, steadier than the river beside it. Patient and absolute, the way beautiful things are patient, as though they know they will still be beautiful long after the particular afternoon in which you are looking at them has ended, long after you yourself have become part of the flat and indifferent plain. The lions processed along the walls in their endless, frozen walk. The dragons rose against the blue. And the city breathed around them, loud and alive and smelling of sesame oil and river water and the particular warm dust of a summer afternoon on the Mesopotamian plain, magnificent and temporary, like everything magnificent, like everything. Great things do not end the way we imagine they will. We carry, somewhere in the mind, a picture of how endings happen, dramatic, decisive, the kind of ending that announces itself with noise and finality, that leaves no ambiguity about what has occurred or when. A gate broken. A fire visible from a distance. A moment after which everything is different and everyone who was present knows that everything is different. We imagine endings this way because it is easier. Because a clean ending can be located in time, given a date, placed in a sequence, and then, having been placed, left behind. The story is over. We can move to the next chapter. But Babylon did not end that way. Babylon ended the way a fire ends when no one is tending it and the wood runs out gradually, not with a sudden extinction but with a long, slow diminishment, each hour a little less bright than the hour before, the warmth persisting longer than the light, the embers holding their heat in the dark for a time that feels, to anyone watching, both shorter and longer than expected. And then, at some point that cannot be precisely identified because it was not a moment but a process, the fire is gone. Not dramatically. Just gone. And the space where it was is dark and cool and holds nothing but the faint smell of what was burning. The men who walked through the Ishtar Gate in October of 539 before the Common Era was not a destroyer. His name was Cyrus. He was the king of Persia, the founder of the Achaemenid Empire, and he had spent the previous decade building the largest political entity the world had yet seen, absorbing Media, Lydia, and vast stretches of Central Asia into an empire so large that its administration required a bureaucratic sophistication that even Babylon, with all its centuries of administrative tradition, had not quite achieved. He was, by the standards of ancient conquest, unusually interested in the people he conquered, in their gods, their traditions, their sense of their own identity. He did not, as a rule, destroy the things he took. He absorbed them. Babylon, in the autumn of 539, was taken without a battle. The sources, both the Babylonian chronicle that records the event in dry administrative language and the later account of Herodotus, which is more dramatic and almost certainly less reliable in its details, agree on the essential fact: the city fell to Cyrus without the kind of military engagement that would have left physical evidence of destruction. There was a battle at a place called Opis, upstream on the Tigris, where the Babylonian army was defeated. There may have been some fighting at the walls. But the city itself, the great walled city with its blue gate and its ziggurat and its temples and its hundreds of thousands of inhabitants, was entered by the Persian army with a minimum of violence. Some ancient sources say the population welcomed Cyrus. Whether that is entirely true, or true in the complicated way that things are true when a powerful army is standing outside your walls and the alternative to welcoming it is being destroyed by it, is a question that the surviving record does not allow us to answer with confidence. What we can say is that Cyrus entered Babylon, took the hands of the statue of Marduk in the ceremony that confirmed him as the legitimate king of Babylon in the eyes of the city's religious establishment, and issued a proclamation, preserved on a clay cylinder now in the British Museum, that announced his intention to respect the gods of the peoples he had conquered and to allow those who had been displaced by Babylonian policy, including the Judean exiles, to return to their homelands. He presented himself not as a conqueror but as a liberator. Whether he believed this, or whether it was a sophisticated piece of political communication designed to ease the absorption of a very large and very important city into his empire, is another question that history cannot entirely resolve. Probably both. The gap between what powerful people believe about themselves and what serves their interests has always been smaller than they tend to realize, and Cyrus was intelligent enough to understand that a city which believed itself liberated was easier to govern than a city which knew itself conquered. Babylon continued. Under Persian rule, the city remained an important administrative center, one of the capitals of the empire, a place where the Persian king maintained a palace and spent portions of the year, a city whose economic and cultural importance was recognized and preserved by the new power in charge. The temples continued to function. The scribal schools continued to train their students. The astronomical observations continued to be made from the top of the ziggurat, and the records of those observations continued to be kept, because the Persians, whatever their other interests and inclinations, understood the value of the astronomical tradition the Babylonians had developed and had no interest in interrupting it. For a time, it seemed as though Babylon might simply continue indefinitely under successive foreign rulers, Persian, then Greek, then Parthian, each dynasty taking the city as it found it and adapting to it rather than transforming it, the way a river adapts to the landscape it flows through rather than remaking it. But adaptation is not preservation. And the landscape was changing. The first serious rupture came not from outside but from inside, from the relationship between the city and its Persian rulers, which deteriorated over time in ways that produced, eventually, a violent response. In 482 before the Common Era, the city revolted against the Persian king Xerxes. The revolt was suppressed, and Xerxes, who was a less patient and less politically sophisticated man than his ancestor Cyrus, responded with a harshness that Cyrus would not have chosen. He carried off the statue of Marduk, the same statue whose hand Cyrus had taken in the ceremony of legitimate kingship, the physical embodiment of Babylonian religious and political identity, and melted it down. The statue was gold. It weighed, according to ancient sources, approximately 800 kilograms. This single act, more than any military defeat, more than any political subjugation, struck at something fundamental in Babylon's sense of itself. The statue of Marduk was not merely a religious object. It was the city's identity made material, the physical presence of the god whose favor had made Babylon great, whose annual festival had structured the city's sacred calendar, whose temple at the heart of the city had been the center around which everything else was organized. Without the statue, the New Year festival could not be performed in its proper form. Without the festival, the cosmic renewal that the festival enacted, the re-establishment of order over chaos, the confirmation of the king's divine mandate to rule, could not occur. The city was not destroyed, but something essential had been removed from it. The remaining centuries of Babylon's existence are, in the historical record, a story of gradual diminishment, of a city that continued to function but lost, piece by piece, the conditions that had made it extraordinary. Alexander the Great arrived in 331 before the Common Era, having defeated the Persian Empire, and he too entered the city without destroying it. He too recognized its importance. He made plans, ambitious and detailed plans, to restore the great ziggurat, which had fallen into disrepair under the later Persian kings, and to make Babylon the capital of his new empire. He died in Babylon in 323, at the age of 32, before any of those plans could be realized. After Alexander, his generals fought over the pieces of his empire with the focused destructiveness that tends to follow the sudden removal of an organizing authority. Babylon changed hands, was besieged, was partially damaged, recovered, changed hands again. Each transition took something: people, resources, the particular institutional knowledge that lives in human beings rather than in buildings and cannot be rebuilt simply by restoring a structure. The population began to drift. Not suddenly, not all at once, but in the way that populations drift from cities that are losing their reason to exist, in the decisions of individual families, the small practical calculations of merchants and craftsmen and administrators who look at the city around them and conclude, without drama and without any sense of participating in a historical process, that opportunities lie elsewhere, that the trade routes have shifted, that the new power center is in a different location, that the irrigation channels require maintenance that is not being adequately provided and the fields are becoming less productive. That the city, for reasons that are difficult to articulate precisely but are nonetheless visible in the texture of daily life, is contracting rather than expanding. A new city was built nearby, Seleucia on the Tigris, founded by one of Alexander's successors as the new administrative center of the region. It drew population from Babylon the way a new river channel draws water from an old one, not by force, but by the simple logic of where things flow most easily. The scribal schools closed, or moved, or simply ceased to produce students when there were no longer institutions in the city that required their skills. The temples were maintained with decreasing resources by a decreasing number of priests. The astronomical observations continued. The last dated Babylonian astronomical tablet has been identified as coming from 75 of the Common Era, meaning that someone in or near Babylon was still making and recording astronomical observations for more than 6 centuries after the city had begun its decline. A remarkable persistence of intellectual tradition in the face of everything else falling away. The water management systems that had made the agricultural land around the city productive required constant maintenance, the clearing of silt from the canals, the repair of the levees, the careful annual management of the flooding cycle that had been the foundation of Mesopotamian agriculture since before Babylon existed. When the administrative capacity that had organized that maintenance contracted, the systems began to fail. Fields that had been productive became waterlogged, or dried out, or were invaded by salt drawn up from the deep soil by changes in the water table. The agricultural basis of the city's existence became less reliable. And the desert, patient as it had always been, began to reclaim what the city had taken from it. This happened slowly. Over decades. Over centuries. The mud brick houses that were abandoned were not demolished. They simply stopped being maintained, and mud brick, which is an excellent building material when it is kept dry and repaired, returns to the earth with surprising speed when it is not. The walls absorbed rain. The foundations softened. The structures settled and slumped and eventually collapsed back into the mounded earth from which they had been made, leaving behind low ridges and depressions that would puzzle travelers for centuries before anyone thought to excavate them and discover what they contained. The bricks were taken. This is one of the most poignant facts about the archaeology of Babylon, that the site was used for centuries as a source of building material by the people of the surrounding region, who understood that the ancient city contained millions of fired bricks of good quality and that fired brick was valuable and that the dead city had no use for what the living needed. Ancient kings and medieval rulers and Ottoman administrators all drew on the bricks of Babylon for their own construction projects. Some of the material that built the city of Hilla, the modern town near the ancient site, was once part of the walls of Nebuchadnezzar's palace, or the processional way, or the private houses of merchants and bakers and priests who lived and worked in the city 2,500 years ago. The material was not lost. It was redistributed, reused, incorporated into new structures that served new purposes in a world that had moved on from everything Babylon had represented. This is, perhaps, a less mournful way of thinking about it. The city did not disappear. It transformed. Its bricks became other buildings. Its astronomical records became the foundation on which Greek astronomy built, and through Greek astronomy, the foundation on which everything that followed, the long, complex, still unfinished project of human beings trying to understand the universe they inhabit, was constructed. Its legal thinking entered the broader stream of ancient Near Eastern legal tradition. Its stories, its gods, its myths of creation and flood and the descent of a goddess into the underworld, these things moved through the cultures that came after Babylon the way water moves through soil, invisible but present, shaping what grows above them. The last visitors to the site who might have recognized it for what it was, who had living memories of the city in something like its functioning form, were gone before the first century of the Common Era had ended. By the time the great age of Islamic civilization was at its height, 1,000 years after the last astronomical observation was recorded, the site of Babylon was a series of low mounds rising from the flat plain, their origin unknown to most of the people who passed them, their contents unsuspected beneath the surface of the earth. The river moved past them, as it always had. The sky above them was the same sky, the same vast, flat, uninterrupted Mesopotamian sky, still full of the same stars that the priests had watched from the top of the ziggurat for 1,000 years. The stars did not know the city was gone. The stars, in their patient indifference, did not know the city had ever been there. But we know. Sitting here in the dark, at this comfortable distance from everything that happened on that plain, we know. We have held the city in the mind tonight, its bread and its laws, its rivers and its walls, its blue gate and its stargazers, its exiles and its kings and its ordinary people living their ordinary days in the warm Mesopotamian light. We have walked its streets and climbed its towers and sat in its courtyards in the cooling evening air. The city is gone. The bricks are scattered. The ziggurat is a mound. But something remains. Something always remains, even when everything visible is gone, some residue of all that living, pressed into the soil, carried downstream, written on clay that survived because clay, fired or simply dried, is more durable than almost anything else human beings have used to record their thoughts and their transactions and their observations of the sky. The embers are very low now. The warmth is still there, if you hold your hands close enough. Somewhere in a museum, in a room with controlled temperature and carefully managed light, a piece of clay is sitting on a shelf. It is small enough to hold in one hand. It is the color of pale earth, the particular pale brown of silt dried in the sun, which is exactly what it is, formed from the same dark soil of the Mesopotamian riverbank that formed the walls of the houses and the bricks of the temples and the tablets on which the laws of Hammurabi were copied by students in the lamplight of scribal schools that ceased to exist 2,000 years ago. It fits in the palm with a comfortable weight, not light, not heavy, but present in the way that old things are present, with a density that seems slightly greater than their physical mass would suggest, as though the time they have absorbed has made them heavier. On its surface, pressed into the clay before it dried, are marks. Wedge-shaped marks, made by a reed stylus held at a specific angle and pressed with a specific pressure into the soft surface, each mark the product of a trained hand performing a motion so practiced it had become automatic, the way a musician's fingers find a familiar passage without the musician needing to think about where they are going. The marks form words. The words form sentences. The sentences record something, a transaction, perhaps, or an astronomical observation, or a line from a literary text being copied for the 100th time by a student who is learning, through the act of copying, the tradition he is being trained to carry forward. We cannot read it easily. Most of us cannot read it at all. But it is there. It has been there for 4,000 years, patiently waiting on whatever surface it happened to be resting on, buried in the soil of the Mesopotamian plain for most of that time, then excavated by archaeologists in the 19th or 20th century, cleaned with careful brushes, catalogued, transported, stored, studied. It has outlasted the student who made it, and the teacher who taught the student, and the school where the teaching happened, and the city that contained the school, and the empire that contained the city, and every political entity that has existed in that part of the world since the city fell. It has outlasted almost everything. Clay is patient in a way that almost nothing else is patient. This is one of the stranger gifts that Mesopotamian civilization left to history, not the gift it intended to leave, not the monuments and the temples and the administrative systems and the legal traditions, but the accidental gift of a medium so durable that the most ordinary transactions of daily life survived while the buildings that housed those transactions crumbled and the people who conducted them dissolved back into the earth. We know more about the daily life of an ordinary Babylonian merchant than we know about the daily life of many people who lived much closer to our own time, because the merchant recorded his transactions in clay and the clay did not decay. The tablets are everywhere, in a sense. They are in the British Museum and the Louvre and the Pergamon Museum in Berlin and the Iraq Museum in Baghdad and dozens of university collections and private collections around the world, hundreds of thousands of them, possibly more, many still untranslated, many still unread since the day they were written, containing information that no living person has yet encountered. Contracts and letters and astronomical records and mathematical tables and medical texts and hymns to gods whose temples no longer exist and lamentations over cities whose names are now known only to specialists and love poems and instructions for the preparation of medicines and records of loans made and repaid and disputes settled and apprentices bound to masters and slaves freed by the terms of wills. The full texture of a civilization, pressed into clay. The work of reading that civilization, of translating the cuneiform script, of understanding the language, of placing the individual tablets in their historical and social context, has been going on since the mid-19th century, when European scholars first began to crack the code of the wedge-shaped marks that travelers had been noticing on ancient Near Eastern monuments for centuries without understanding what they said. It is slow work. It is the kind of work that does not produce dramatic results quickly, that requires years of training before a scholar can begin to contribute meaningfully, that progresses in small increments rather than sudden revelations. But it progresses. Every year, tablets that have been sitting in museum storage for a century or more are examined and translated for the first time. Every year, something that a Babylonian scribe wrote 4,000 years ago enters human awareness for the first time since the clay dried. The conversation between the past and the present, conducted through these small pale objects, is ongoing, quiet, patient, conducted at the speed of scholarship rather than the speed of news, but real. The first Europeans to excavate the site of Babylon arrived in the 19th century, at a moment when the ancient Near East was opening to archaeological investigation and the European powers who dominated the region politically were using that dominance, among other things, to investigate and remove the material remains of civilizations far older than their own. The excavations were conducted under conditions that modern archaeology would consider inadequate. The recording methods were imprecise. The understanding of stratigraphy was limited. The distinction between what was scientifically significant and what was simply attractive or valuable was not always made with the care that later generations would bring to it. Things were lost in the finding of them. But things were also found. The Ishtar Gate, not the original in its full height, which was far below the surface, but a later reconstructed version built over it, was excavated by the German archaeologist Robert Koldewey in the early 20th century, and portions of its extraordinary glazed brick surface were removed and eventually reconstructed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, where they stand today in a room that attempts, with considerable success, to communicate the scale and the color of what the gate must have been like. The blue is still there. After 2,500 years in the ground, the blue is still there, not as vivid as it was when the kilns first fired the glaze, perhaps, but present, undeniable, the same deep saturated color that was chosen by Nebuchadnezzar's craftsmen to announce the power and the beauty of the city to everyone who approached it. People stand in front of it in a museum in Berlin and feel something, not the same thing that a traveler felt approaching Babylon across the flat plain in the 6th century before the Common Era, but something related to it. A recognition of intention. A sense of being in the presence of a human decision made a very long time ago, the decision to make something beautiful, to invest resources and skill and careful thought into the creation of something that would be more than merely functional, that would communicate something about the people who made it beyond the bare fact of their existence. That decision is still communicating. Across 25 centuries and a museum gallery in Northern Europe, it is still doing exactly what it was built to do, producing in the person who stands before it a moment of quiet recognition, a pause in the ordinary flow of thought, a brief and real encounter with the evidence that human beings have always been capable of making things that outlast them. The name Babylon has traveled further than the city ever did. It entered the Hebrew scriptures as the name of captivity and worldly power, and through the scriptures it entered Christianity, and through Christianity it spread across every culture that Christianity reached, which is to say most of the world. It became a metaphor for excess, for pride, for the dangerous magnificence of human ambition, for everything that is great and doomed. The book of Revelation uses it as a symbol so resonant that the word Babylon, for most of the past 2,000 years, has carried a weight of meaning far beyond its historical referent, has functioned as a kind of shorthand for the idea that great human powers rise and fall, that nothing built on earthly foundations lasts forever, that the towers we construct against the sky will eventually return to the earth from which their materials came. The Rastafari tradition, emerging in Jamaica in the 20th century, used Babylon as the name for the oppressive system, the colonial power, the corrupt establishment, the forces that hold people in captivity and extract their labor and diminish their dignity. The word traveled from the Mesopotamian plain to the Caribbean, from the 6th century before the Common Era to the 20th century of it, carrying its freight of meaning across every ocean and every cultural transformation it encountered, still recognizable, still weighted, still doing work. And in the secular imagination, in the history books and the documentaries and the museum exhibits and the conversations of people who are interested in the ancient world, Babylon survives as a place. As a real place, with real streets and real people and a real river running through it, that existed for a very long time and produced things of genuine beauty and genuine importance and then faded, as everything fades, back into the earth. Both versions of Babylon are real. The metaphor and the city. The symbol and the mud brick. The name that traveled everywhere and the site that stayed where it was, in the flat plain between two rivers, slowly becoming the low mounds that a driver on the road between Baghdad and Basra might pass today without knowing exactly what they are, or might know precisely what they are and feel, looking at them from the window of a moving vehicle, the particular emotion that old places produce in people who are paying attention. Not grief, exactly. Not nostalgia, which requires a personal connection to the thing that is gone. Something quieter and less specific than either of those. Something like the feeling of standing at the edge of a very large body of water and looking out at the horizon, a feeling that the mind is briefly touching something larger than itself, that the ordinary boundaries of individual experience are, for a moment, slightly permeable, slightly open to something that extends beyond them. The mounds are quiet in the evening. In the late afternoon, the light on the Mesopotamian plain becomes extraordinary, the same light it has always been, the same low-angle golden light that falls on flat land with an evenness and a warmth that elevated terrain never quite achieves, filling every surface it touches with a color that is neither yellow nor orange but something between them. Something that has no precise name in English but that every person who has ever watched a sunset on a flat plain has felt settle into them and slow their breathing and produce, without effort or intention, a moment of stillness. That light falls on the mounds of Babylon in the evening, as it has always fallen, as it was falling before the city existed and as it will fall long after the last trace of the city has been absorbed into the earth so completely that even the archaeologists cannot find it. The Euphrates is still there. Changed, as we said, narrower, in some places rerouted, diminished by the demands of a modern world that needs its water for agriculture and for cities that did not exist when Babylon was standing. But there. Still moving in the same direction it has always moved, still carrying silt down from the mountains to the north, still shaping the flat land through which it passes with the same patient, indifferent persistence that it has always had. If you stood on the banks of the Euphrates on a clear night near the site of ancient Babylon and looked up, you would see the same stars. Not metaphorically the same, actually the same stars, in the same positions relative to each other, the same patterns that the Babylonian astronomers named and watched and recorded with such extraordinary patience across so many centuries. Orion rising in the east in winter. The Pleiades in the spring sky. Jupiter, when it is present, moving slowly against the background of the fixed stars along the path of the ecliptic that the Babylonians mapped with such precision. The Milky Way, on a night without a moon, dense and overwhelming from horizon to horizon, the same river of light that the priests watched from the top of the ziggurat on clear nights when the seeing was good and the clay was fresh and the reed stylus was ready. They watched those stars. We watch those stars. Something connects us to them across the enormous distance of time, not a sentimental connection, not the comfortable fiction that the past was like the present in ways that make us feel continuous with it, but something realer and stranger than that. The actual physical continuity of a world that has been here for longer than any of the civilizations that have tried to understand it, that will be here long after the current civilizations have added their own layer to the accumulated sediment of human history. The stars are patient. The river is patient. The clay in the museum, with its wedge-shaped marks pressed into it 4,000 years ago by a hand that knew nothing of museums or of the curious people who would one day stand before it trying to understand what it said, that clay is patient too. Everything that survives from Babylon survived because something about it resisted the ordinary processes of dissolution, because clay is harder than time in certain conditions, because blue glaze bonds to brick at a temperature that produces a surface almost impervious to the ordinary chemistry of decay, because certain texts were considered important enough to copy and recopy across the centuries even as the civilization that produced them was fading. But also, perhaps, because the things that those objects contained, The human attention, the human intention, the accumulated weight of all the living that was done in that city across all those centuries, had a persistence of its own. Not supernatural, not mystical. Simply the ordinary persistence of things that were made with care, that were made to last, that were made by people who understood, at some level, that they were adding themselves to something larger than themselves, something that had been going on before they arrived and would continue after they were gone. We are part of that continuation, in our own small way. By spending this evening in Babylon, by walking its streets and watching its stars and sitting in its courtyards and listening to the sound of the Euphrates moving through the dark, we have added our own attention to the long record of human attention that the city has received across its existence. We have joined, briefly and quietly, the list of people who found this place worth thinking about, worth caring about, worth holding in the mind with the particular gentleness that old things deserve. It is not nothing. It is, in its small way, the same impulse that drove the scribes to copy the old texts, the astronomers to maintain the long record of their observations, the craftsmen who made the blue glaze to bring it to the temperature that would make it last. The impulse to preserve, to transmit, to say, this existed, and it mattered, and I am passing it forward in whatever form I can. The city is returning to the earth. Slowly, over the centuries that remain, the last traces of it will dissolve into the soil of the Mesopotamian plain, and the mounds will flatten, and eventually there will be nothing visible at the surface to indicate that one of the greatest cities in the ancient world once stood here, that hundreds of thousands of people once lived here, that bread was baked and laws were written and stars were watched and children ran through narrow alleyways and merchants weighed their silver and priests climbed long stairs in the cooling evening air, and a king built his city in the most beautiful blue he could find. But the clay tablets will still be in the museums, and the blue will still be on the gate, and the stars will still be in the sky, the same stars, patient and indifferent and beautiful, turning their slow circles above the flat plain in the dark, above the river, above the mounds, above everything. Let them turn above you now. Let the river move in the dark, as it has always moved. Let the plain extend in every direction, warm and flat and still, under the enormous sky. You have been to Babylon tonight. You have walked its streets and heard its sounds and felt, for a little while, the particular quality of attention that a very old and very real place produces in the people who take the time to imagine themselves inside it, the slight expansion of the ordinary boundaries of the self, the brief and genuine sense of connection to something larger and older than the familiar present. That sense does not have to go anywhere. It can simply remain, the way warmth remains in a room after the fire has gone low, present, quiet, requiring nothing, asking nothing, simply there in the air around you as the evening deepens and the body grows heavier and the mind releases, gently, its hold on the particular details of the day that is ending. The bread has been baked. The laws have been written. The stars have been watched and recorded with patient, careful attention by people who understood that the world reveals its structures only to those willing to look long enough. The Euphrates is moving through the dark. The city is breathing, slowly, in the warm Mesopotamian air. And somewhere, in the enormous and indifferent sky above the flat plain, a single star is rising, the same star that rose above Babylon 4,000 years ago, above the walls and the gate and the ziggurat and the houses with their courtyard fig trees and their clay ovens and their families sleeping in the cooling dark. The same star, still rising. Let it carry you,